She walked into the provincial archery grounds, wearing weathered boots and carrying a homemade bow case. Competitors snickered. Officials raised eyebrows. One young archer even shouted, "Lost your way to the bingo hall, Grandma." But when Nora Keller stepped up to the line and knocked her first arrow, what happened next silenced an entire stadium and revealed a talent the archery world had foolishly overlooked. Before we reveal how a simple woman in worn boots humbled an arena of elite archers, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments below where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The Springfield Archery Center didn't have a sign, just an elegant wooden archway with gold-leafed arrows crossing at the top. That was the whole point. If you needed directions, you weren't meant to compete there. The grounds sprawled across 8 pristine acres, each blade of grass cut to the exact same height, each target lane oriented for optimal visibility. The smell of fresh leather, carbon fiber, and ambition hung thick in the morning air. Everywhere you looked stood athletes in crisp uniforms, bearing sponsor logos and elite academy patches. Their equipment cases, glossy, branded, wheeled like luxury luggage, lined the prep area like a row of expensive cars at a country club. This place wasn't just a sports venue, it was a temple to precision, to exclusivity, to that peculiar privilege of people born into the right clubs with the right coaches and the right parents writing the right checks. Nora Keller didn't look like she belonged anywhere near it. Hell, she didn't even try to. There she stood at the registration table in worn canvas pants that had faded from too many washes, not from some designer's weathered collection. Her olive green button-up wasn't from any pro shop, just cotton that had softened with the years. And those boots, God, they were practically a confession, with scuffed toes and laces that had been replaced at least twice. She'd tied her silver-streaked hair back with what looked like her granddaughter's scrunchie, navy blue, slightly too small, forcing wisps of grey to escape around her temples. Her bow case, not those $600 hard shells with custom foam inserts, hung from her shoulder like an old friend, canvas, hand-stitched at the seams, with a patch on the side that had clearly been repaired more than once. The zipper struggled halfway, like it was embarrassed to be seen in such company. Meanwhile, the archery world floated around her like it was made of different air. Coaches with tablets and wireless earpieces monitoring form. Young athletes in compression sleeves and branded visors, comparing competition stats and social media followers. The whole place hummed with the subtle frequency of people who measured. Worth in corporate sponsorships and tournament seedings, Nora just adjusted the strap on her shoulder and stepped forward. The registration volunteer did a double take. She was young, maybe 20, with perfect ponytail and a polo shirt so crisp it probably still had packaging creases. Her smile flickered when Nora handed over her entry form. Competition registration is closed," she said, trying to sound polite but landing on patronizing. "These are the provincial qualifiers. Are you looking for the recreation course?" "I'm registered," Nora replied, unbothered as sunshine. "Lane 17, Keller." The volunteer's eyes widened slightly as she checked her tablet. "Oh, I see, you're competing?" Nora nodded once. "That's right." Behind her, a small group of collegiate archers noticed the exchange. One of them, tall, shoulders filled out his academy jacket like he paid someone to make sure they did, leaned toward his friend. "Guess they opened a senior division," he snorted. They laughed. Nora didn't even blink. She spotted the equipment check station behind the desk. "Looks like it's over there," she said quietly, pointing. "Mind if I head that way?" "Ma'am, this is a qualifying round." But Nora was already moving, not storming off like someone with something to prove, just walking with the easy rhythm of someone who'd walked plenty of ranges before, someone who knew she belonged on the line, even if the competitors thought otherwise. From the coaching area, 2 young instructors with clipboards watched her crossing toward the equipment station. "She brought that?" one whispered, pointing at Nora's canvas case. "This is gonna be good." Nora reached the equipment check, laid her case on the table, and slowly unzipped it. The case opened like a book revealing its story. A simple wooden recurve bow. Not the carbon fiber compounds everyone else carried. No multi-pin sight, no stabilizers or vibration dampeners. Just wood, string, and knowledge, wrapped in a hand-oiled finish that gleamed with years of care. The equipment inspector peered at it like she'd placed an archaeological artifact on his table. His expression shifted from professional detachment to genuine curiosity as he examined the bow's limbs, running his fingers along grain lines that had been polished to a honeyed glow by decades of careful handling. "This is traditional equipment," he said, as if diagnosing a disease. "Yes. Are you aware this is an open division? Everyone else is shooting compound." Nora gave a small nod. "I'm aware." The inspector turned the bow over, studying the craftsmanship with growing appreciation. Unlike the mass-produced compounds with their identical specifications, this bow had character etched into every curve and line. It wasn't just made, it had been born of someone's hands and heart. "This is—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Beautiful work. Custom. My husband made it," Nora replied quietly. "Nearly 30 years ago." The inspector's eyebrows lifted slightly. He was a bowyer, a cabinet maker, but he knew his way around yew and osage. A brief shadow crossed her face. "He always said what matters isn't the tool's complexity, but the hands that hold it." He picked up the bow, turning it in his hands with bewildered expression. His fingers traced a series of small notches carved into the lower limb. "What are these?" he asked. "Range marks," Nora said softly. "One for every 100 hours of practice." The inspector raised an eyebrow as he counted. There were dozens. He handed it back cautiously and stamped her form. She hadn't come to impress him. She'd come because sometimes you just need to hit a damn target. The preparation area buzzed with pre-competition energy. Young archers in team colors stretched in synchronized routines. Coaches checked equipment with laser-focused intensity. Parents hovered near the edges, some pretending to be calm, others openly biting fingernails. Nora found a small, empty space and began her own preparation. No stretching routine, no visualization exercises, just a woman unpacking a bow that felt like an extension of her arm. She tested the string tension with practiced fingers, checked each arrow's straightness with a casual eye that missed nothing. A group of teenage archers on a nearby bench stared without hiding their amusement. One of them, a boy with perfect teeth and a custom finger tab that probably cost more than Nora's monthly grocery bill, nudged his teammates. "Check it out," he stage whispered. "Primitive Technology Workshop." "Probably thinks let off is something you get from the bus," another added, sending them into fits of poorly suppressed laughter. Nora heard every word but gave no indication, focusing instead on the small rituals that had served her since before these children were born. Lane 17 sat at the far end of the field, the least desirable position, where the afternoon sun would hit directly in the eyes. It was where they put people who wouldn't affect the rankings anyway. Nora set down her case and looked out across the perfect grounds. Morning light caught the metal stands like camera flash. Her fingertips brushed the grip of her bow. One of the top-seeded archers, Talia Reynolds, 19, with 3 national junior titles and a custom bow worth more than Nora's car, walked by with her coach. She stopped, staring at Nora's traditional bow with the horrified fascination of someone watching an antique car try to enter a Formula One race. "That's not even—" she started, then couldn't seem to finish the thought. Her coach, a man with the hard-set mouth of someone who'd never missed an opportunity to correct someone, barely tried to lower his voice. "Some local publicity thing, probably. Human interest. Just focus on your rounds." Nora didn't react. She simply unfolded a small cloth and laid out her arrows, wooden with real feather fletching, hand-tied, hand-cut, no matching spine weights or serialized manufacturing, just craftsmanship that predated computer targeting. She ran her fingers lightly over the fletchings, adjusting a single feather with a touch so gentle it barely disturbed the air. Each arrow looked identical to the untrained eye, but Nora knew them individually, knew the small variations in weight, the subtle differences in spine flex, the almost imperceptible variations in balance. These weren't store-bought arrows, mass-produced, to uniform specifications. Each had been shaped by hand in the small workshop behind what used to be their farmhouse. Each had received the same careful attention, the same devotion to craft that had once defined her life. She could tell, without looking, which ones would fly truer in a crosswind, which would maintain velocity over distance, which would perform best in the humidity that had settled into the valley this morning. Her hands remembered, even if the rest of the world had forgotten or never known who she once was. 37 years ago, she'd just missed the Olympic team by a single point. 32 years ago, she'd set a national record at the indoor championships that held for nearly a decade. 25 years ago, she'd begun teaching her daughter on a handmade mini-bow before the girl could even read. And now, her fingers still carried that history, that knowledge, encoded in muscle and tendon and bone. The morning practice session began, and the sound of high-tech compounds releasing carbon arrows filled the field. Perfect groupings appeared. On targets, coaches murmured approvals. Athletes adjusted sights by fractions of millimeters. And then there was Nora. She stepped up to the line without ceremony. No practice stretches, no visualization routine. Just a woman who'd done this so many times she didn't need ritual. She knocked her first practice arrow, drew it to her cheek and loosed. It landed wide. Not terribly, but enough to miss the 9 ring. Whispers rippled across nearby lanes. Someone actually laughed, not loudly, but with that particular tone that says, "I knew it." She shot again. This one drifted high. By her third practice arrow, which hit the 7 ring, a small audience had gathered. Not out of admiration, out of spectacle. "She's even shooting with fingers, no release aid," someone commented, not bothering to hide their amusement. Another voice, louder. "Someone tell her this isn't 1970. Nora didn't flinch, didn't defend, just adjusted her stance slightly and kept shooting, each arrow landing in the mid-rings. Not terrible, just uncompetitive, ordinary. She finished practice looking like exactly what they all assumed, a hobbyist out of her depth. What they didn't see was how carefully she watched the breeze ripple through the target flags, how her eyes tracked the slight movement of dust motes in the morning light. She wasn't practicing accuracy. She was reading the range. As she collected her arrows, a man wearing an academy tracksuit approached, coach name tag to his chest, arms crossed over it like a barrier. "Excuse me," he said, with the strained courtesy of someone about to deliver advice disguised as concern. "I couldn't help noticing your setup." Nora looked up. "Yes?" "I run the junior program over at Summit Elite," he continued, nodding toward a group of teenagers with matching equipment. "And I just wanted to say, it takes guts to come out here with traditional gear." She waited, knowing there was more. "But," he lowered his voice, "this is a serious competition. These kids are competing for national spots, scholarships. Some even have Olympic track potential." He gestured toward her practice results. "You might want to consider withdrawing before the scored rounds." No shame in it. The sport's evolved. Nora studied him for a moment, not angry, just taking his measure. His hands, she noticed, were soft, uncalloused, the hands of someone who coached but no longer shot. "Has the target changed?" she asked. He blinked. "What?" "The target," she repeated. "Still 10 rings? Still a bullseye in the middle?" "Well, yes, but then we're still playing the same game." She shouldered her bow and walked past him, leaving the coach staring after her with the baffled expression of a man who'd never considered that wisdom didn't always come in carbon fiber. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Competitors, please prepare for the qualification round. We will begin with lane 1 in 5 minutes." Nora knelt to tighten her bootlaces, ignoring the sideways glances. Her hands were steady, her breathing even, but something had shifted inside her. She had expected skepticism. She hadn't expected mockery, but maybe this was exactly what the moment needed, because while they had laughed at her gear, her age, and her quiet, none of them had paid attention to what mattered. None of them had asked why she'd missed during practice. None of them had noticed how she'd been mapping the wind. None of them, in fact, had bothered to wonder why a woman would enter a competition she seemed destined to lose. They were about to find out. The qualifying round began at lane 1, with each archer shooting 10 arrows for score. The electronic scoreboard lit up with impressive numbers, mostly high 8s and 9s, with the occasional perfect 10. Talia Reynolds shot a 96 out of 100, earning impressed nods from the judges. By the time they reached lane 15, the top score was a 97 from a collegiate archer with 3 equipment sponsors and a private coach. Finally, they called lane 17. Nora Keller, unaffiliated, the announcer said flatly, not even trying to inject enthusiasm. A few spectators looked up out of curiosity. Most had already turned away, assuming the end of the real competition had come. Nora stepped to the line. No ritual, no dramatic preparation, just a quiet readiness that came from someplace deeper than nerves. "Lane 17, clear to fire," called the line judge, already reaching for his lunch. Nora nocked her first arrow. Here's where something odd happened. She didn't take the shot immediately. Instead, she lowered the bow slightly, waited 3 full seconds, feeling something no one else could feel, then raised it again with the smallest adjustment to her aim. She loosed. The arrow flew with a different sound than the carbon shafts that had preceded it. Deeper, woodier, older. Thwack. Bullseye. Dead center, a couple of people in lawn chairs glanced up. Nora didn't react, didn't smile, didn't nod. She simply reached for her second arrow. Again, that small pause, that slight adjustment, that release. Thwack. Dead center again. Now heads began to turn. The line judge lowered his sandwich. Third arrow. Same calm, same pause. Same result. Bullseye. A whisper crawled through the spectator area. Even Talia stopped checking her phone. Fourth arrow. Bullseye. Fifth. Bullseye. Talia's coach stood suddenly. "What the hell?" The whispers turned to murmurs. People who'd been loading cars or packing up now drifted back toward the fence. By arrow. 6. The field had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Nora continued with the same measured calm, each shot preceded by that strange weight, like she was listening to something only she could hear. A sports photographer, who'd been packing up his gear now, approached the barrier, camera raised. The continuous electronic shutter clicked rapidly as he captured what was becoming history in real time. A row of officials had gathered at the judges' table, some checking rulebooks, others simply watching with the stunned expressions of people, witnessing something they'd previously believed impossible. Nora seemed to exist in her own world. She didn't hear the murmurs, didn't notice the growing crowd, didn't see the phones recording her every move. In that moment, there was only her. The bow, the arrow, and the conversation between them. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat steadied. The world narrowed to the single point 30 yards downrange, where wood and feather would meet paper and foam. 7. The arrow flew like it had a will of its own, straight and true, joining its siblings in the tight cluster at the center of the target. This wasn't just accuracy, this was artistry. 8. A judge wiped his glasses, squinting at the target as if unsure he could trust his own eyes. The college champion who'd been so confident of victory now stood slack-jawed, his trophy-winning form suddenly feeling hollow against what he was witnessing. 9, perfect, perfect, perfect. When she reached for her 10th arrow, even the judges had abandoned any pretense of casual observation. They stood at the scoring table, eyes locked on lane 17, like they were witnessing some impossible magic trick. Nora's fingers closed around the final shaft. She knocked it slowly, the feather fletching, brushing her cheek as she drew. The entire field held its breath. A sudden gust of wind rippled the flags, the strongest of the day. Anyone watching closely would have seen Nora's slight adjustment, the minuscule shift in her aim to compensate. She released. Thwack. 10 out of 10. Perfect score, not a single miss. Every arrow so tightly clustered that from a distance they looked like a single shaft. The scoreboard flickered, then displayed 100, 100. No one spoke, no one clapped, no one even moved, until finally the head judge stepped forward. Perfect score, he announced, voice oddly quiet. Lane 17. And just like that, the dam broke. The crowd erupted, not with applause so much as with exclamations of shock. Phones appeared, people stood, whispers became full voice. Did that just happen? That's not possible. Those were wooden arrows. Talia's coach was already on his phone, frantically searching something. She's not in the database, not in any of them. The collegiate champion from lane 15 had gone pale. She compensated for wind changes that happened mid-flight, he said to no one in particular. That's not, you can't. Nora simply unstrung her bow with the same careful movement she'd used to string it. No celebration, no fist pump, just the steady hands of someone completing a job they'd done 1,000 times before. An official approached, still visibly stunned. Miss Keller, we'll need to verify the equipment. She handed it over without comment. As she walked back to the rest area, competitors parted like water around a stone. Gone were the smirks, gone were the jokes. In their place was something almost like fear, the cold recognition that they'd witnessed something outside their understanding. Talia stood in her path, face pale beneath her tan. How did you... The wind was shifting every shot. Nora met her eyes. That's why I waited. But there's no way to calculate. You don't calculate, Nora interrupted softly. You feel. Talia looked down at her own bow, a carbon marvel with more adjustments than a luxury car. For the first time, she seemed uncertain about it. Nora continued past, settling onto a bench at the edge of the field. She pulled a thermos from her case, just tea in a battered metal container that had probably seen as many competitions as most of these kids had seen birthdays. The director of the provincial association approached, clutching a clipboard like it might provide answers. Ms. Keller, he began, voice caught between administrative formality and genuine amazement. Your performance was unexpected. She took a sip of tea. For you, maybe. We don't have any competition record for you. No, she agreed. You wouldn't. He hesitated. May I ask, have you competed before? Nora's eyes drifted past him, toward the mountains in the distance. For the first time, something like emotion passed across her face. Not triumph, but memory. A long time ago, she said finally. National Team Trials 1988, before most of these kids were born. Recognition dawned on the director's face. Wait, Keller, you were... I was, she nodded, but life changes plans sometimes. Just then, a young girl pushed through the gathering crowd, maybe 14 with Nora's eyes and a tentative smile. Grandma, you did it! She exclaimed, forgetting teenage cool in her excitement. Nora's face softened as she stood to embrace her granddaughter. Told you I would. The girl looked up at her, wide-eyed. But you never practice anymore? Not since Mom sold the acreage. Some things, Nora replied quietly, you don't forget. They just wait for you to need them again. The association director cleared his throat. Ms. Keller, a perfect score qualifies you for the national selection camp next month. All expenses covered. He lowered his voice, leaning in slightly. Several people on the committee remember you, Nora, from before. Your indoor championship record stood until 2003. 35 years is a long time to be away from competition, but... He glanced at the target where officials were still measuring and photographing her arrow grouping. Talent like yours doesn't diminish. It just waits. A flicker of something, maybe nostalgia, maybe regret, passed across Nora's face and disappeared just as quickly. For a moment she could smell the pine-scented floor wax of the old convention center where they'd held nationals in her day. Could hear the sound of arrows striking targets in perfect rhythm, could feel the weight of medals against her chest. Then her granddaughter's voice brought her back to the present. Nationals, Grandma, that's where the Olympic team... But Nora was already shaking her head. I didn't come for that. The director looked bewildered. Then... why? Nora looked directly at her granddaughter. Because Lily joined the school archery program, and someone told her she was too old to start, that 14 was already too late, that she'd never catch up to kids who'd been training since they were 6. She gestured toward the lanes where the competition continued. I came to show my granddaughter that skill doesn't care how old you are when you find it, that you're never too late to be exactly who you are. She turned back to the director. Keep the national spot. Give it to one of these kids who's been dreaming of it. I just needed 10 arrows today. That's all. With that, she picked up her case and walked away from the field, her granddaughter trailing beside her, talking excitedly. The crowd parted again, this time not with mockery, but with something approaching reverence. Behind them, Talia Reynolds stood very still, watching Nora go. Something in her expression had changed. Not just surprise, but the beginning of a question. Impulsively, she jogged after them, catching up just before they reached the parking area. Ms. Keller, she called. Wait. Nora paused. Talia stopped, suddenly awkward in her branded gear and sponsored bow. I've been shooting since I was 7. Private coaches, sports psychologists, the works. She hesitated. Could you show me how you knew about the wind? For the first time that day, Nora smiled, really smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes and softens every line of the face. Next Wednesday, she said, the community range, 4 o'clock. Bring your bow and leave your tech at home. Talia nodded, unable to hide her relief. I'll be there. As she walked back toward the competition area, Talia passed her coach, who stared at her questioningly. What was that about? He demanded. Talia looked back at Nora's retreating figure. A simple woman in worn boots, carrying an old bow in a handmade case, who had just delivered the most perfect performance any of them had ever seen. That, she said quietly, was about remembering why we do this. The archery world changed a little after that day, not dramatically, not officially, but in the quiet way that truth sometimes shifts even the most established foundations. Videos, circulated on social media, shaky phone footage at first, then the professional photographer's images. Most showed the same thing, the moment of perfect release, the arrow's flight, the impossible grouping growing tighter with each shot. But the ones that went truly viral weren't of the target or the bow or even Nora's technique. They were the faces in the crowd, the transformation from mockery to disbelief to awe, the journey from assumption to humility. A popular archery channel posted a 10-minute analysis of her form, trying to explain how someone using such basic equipment could achieve such extraordinary results. The comment section was filled with arguments, theories, and finally a collective admission that sometimes technology isn't the answer. Sometimes it's the archer, not the arrow. At elite academies across the region, something subtle changed in the coaching language. Where once instructors had emphasized gear and gadgets, technical specifications and cutting-edge materials, they now spoke more about feel, about awareness, about the connection between archer, bow, and environment, not abandoning progress, but remembering its foundations. A month later, at the national qualifiers, Talia Reynolds stepped onto the line without her coach. She'd kept her compound bow, but removed 3 accessories and added a small wooden bead to her sight, something to remind her of what she'd learned on Wednesdays with Nora. When the wind shifted unexpectedly during her final shot, she paused, waited, listened, and then hit a perfect 10, securing her highest competition score ever. As for Nora, she never did take that national team spot, but every Wednesday afternoon, rain or shine, she could be found at the community range, a simple woman in worn boots, teaching anyone willing to learn what it meant to truly see, truly feel, truly connect with the ancient art of sending an arrow home. And when Lily entered her first school competition 3 months later, she didn't bring the latest gear or wear the trendiest archery clothes. She brought something better. She brought her grandmother's eyes, her grandmother's patience, her grandmother's understanding. The night before, they'd sat together on the back porch of Nora's small house, listening to the summer insects and watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Lily had been nervous, fidgeting with the string of her beginner's compound bow, the one the school had provided. Nothing fancy, but serviceable. "What if I mess up?" she'd asked, voicing the fear that had been growing all week. "What if I embarrass myself?" Nora had taken her granddaughter's hands in her own, those young fingers that had yet to develop calluses, yet to know the thousands of releases that would eventually shape them. "The only way to embarrass yourself," she'd said gently, "is to forget why you're there in the first place." "To win," Lily had guessed. Nora had smiled and shaken her head. "To discover what you're capable of. Not what others expect. Not what the scoreboard says, but what's inside you, waiting to be found." She'd reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden token, worn smooth by years of handling. A simple thing, carved with initials, NK, and the silhouette of an arrow in flight. "My husband made this for me before my first big competition," she'd explained, pressing it into Lily's palm. "Carry it tomorrow, not for luck, for remembering." Remembering what? That every target you face is just another way of meeting yourself. And as she stepped to the line, she remembered what Nora had told her the night before. "The bow isn't the tool," she'd said, brushing Lily's hair back from her forehead. "You are. Have you ever seen someone be underestimated, only to watch them prove every doubter wrong in a single, silent moment? Or maybe you've been in Nora's shoes, laughed at, dismissed, only to prove them all wrong with your talent, your heart, or your sheer persistence. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one of them. If Nora's journey touched something in you, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss tomorrow's story. Share this with someone who deserves to be seen for who they really are. And while you're here, check out one of the videos popping up on your screen now. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.